All right, on section 8.5, which starts on page 319, that's where we're at. Okay, on 319, what we're going to talk about on 8.5 is paying off your installment loans. When you have an installment loan, you pay interest on the unpaid balance. You might have a simple interest installment loan for a car and sell the car before the end of the loan term. If so, you only pay the previous balance plus the current month's interest. This is also known as the final payment. So for example, if for whatever reason you decide, I don't want the vehicle that you have anymore and you still owe on it, what will happen is that if you work with a dealer, for instance, they will call your bank and figure out what the final payment is. All that is what you owe plus the interest for the current month that we're sitting in. Then if they give you any sort of trade-in value on your vehicle, then that, for instance, will go up towards paying that off. On some loans, there might also be a penalty for paying off early. So you got to be careful if there's any penalties on your loan for paying it off early. Sometimes they want you to keep that loan in there no matter what. One motive to paying off the loan before the end of the term is to pay less interest. The amount of interest saved depends on the total payment back plus the sum of the previous payments and the final payment. And the three formulas we're going to use today are these. First of all, interest. This is not a new formula. This is the same formula we've used for, I believe, the last probably 2 or 3 sections. Principal times rate times time. Okay, that formula there we have dealt with for like the last 3 sections, maybe even 4. Okay, so that formula is not anything new. That was where we took the principal, we multiplied it by the percentage, then we multiplied it by 1/12, usually, because there were monthly payments. Then as far as figuring out the final payment, you take the previous balance and add the current month's interest. Okay, so again, when you want to figure out that final payment, you call the bank. A lot of times when you have a pay stub or the stubs, for instance, when I got a loan, and some banks still do this, where they give you your payment book. The last payment in there always has a thing that says call for final payment because of the interest. They want you to make sure that you have the interest all taken care of. Okay? So you take the previous balance plus the current month's interest. That's how you figure out the final payment. And the last formula that we have is interest saved. Now what this is if you pay off a loan early, you're going to save money because you're going to pay less in interest over the course of the whole loan. So what you do for this one is you take your total payback and you minus the sum of your previous payments plus the final payment. Okay? So again, the total payback should be like how much you were supposed to pay back. But then if you subtract out what you actually paid, then that's going to tell you how much you're going to save. Okay, that's the last formula we got for this section. So if you go to page 320, On number 1, it says you plan to finance the purchase of a $1,200 electric scooter with a 12-month loan at 12% interest with a balance of $816.04 after the 4th payment. What's the final payment amount if you pay off the loan with the 5th payment? So instead of going out for the whole loan at 12 months, you decide, you know what, I got the money now, let's pay it off. Boom. So what you do is, the first thing that we have to do in order to figure out the final payment is, you take the previous balance, which was $816.04, we multiply it by the rate, which was 12%, and we multiply it by the time, which is 1 over 12. Again, that's not new. This is what you did on Friday, actually. So what is 816.04 times 0.12 divided by 12? Anybody get it? Huh? $8.16. Right. That's the interest. So to calculate the final payment, what was the previous balance? Sloan, I believe, said $816.04, right? Plus the interest that Rylan gave us, $8.16. If I add those two together, how much is it? $824.20. Okay, so for number 1, they just wanted you to figure out the final payment. So what's happening here, you guys, is in order to figure out the final payment, you take the previous balance, you multiply it by the percent, by the time, that gives you the interest. Then to get the final payment, you add your previous balance plus that interest. Okay, that's how you figure those out. You got to add those two together. Then, number 2 says this. In problem number 1, you had a 12-month loan at $1,200 at 12% interest, purchase electric scooter. The balance after the 4th payment of $106.56 is $816.04. How much did you save by paying off the loan? So we're going to take this one step further and figure out how much we're going to save. Okay? So, first and foremost, here's what the 106.56 was for. 106.56 was your monthly payment. You were supposed to make 12 of those because you took out a 12-month loan. So what is $1,006.56 times 12? Oh, 106.56 times 12. 1,278.72. That's what we should pay back. Is that how much we did pay back, though? I don't think so. How many payments of 106 did we make? We made 4 of them, right? Because didn't on the 5th payment, didn't we decide we were going to pay it off? Right? So what's 106.56 times 4? $426.24. And then what was the final payment that we had? $824.20, I believe, right? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in order to figure out the answer, what you're going to do is you're not going to add these three together right now. What you should have paid back was $1,278.72. What you actually paid were the other two numbers. So in order to figure out how much you saved, subtract both of these from that $1,278. Not separately. What you do is you take $1,278.72 minus $426.24 minus $824.20, and what's the final total after those two are subtracted from it? You saved $28.28, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but you got to remember, this loan was only for a year. It was not for 30 years like a house would be, or 5 years or so for a car, or anything like that. Okay? So in order to get this again, to figure out how much you saved, what you do is you take how much you should have repaid, and you minus out what you actually paid, and that gives you your total. That was number 2. Then if you look on 3 through 7, on 3 through 7, it's exactly like number 1. The first thing that you do for part A, to find the interest, you take the principal times the rate times a 12th. Why are we multiplying by a 12th for the time? We're out of a year and we're dealing with monthly payments. Then on 8, 9, and 10, it'll say what's the final payment and how much does he save by paying off the loan early. So you got to take it a step further, just like we did on the board. Okay? So again, 3 through 7 is just figuring out the interest for part A and the final payment for part B. Then on 8, 9, and 10, you actually have to take it a step further. After you find the interest and the final payment, and you got to figure out how much would he save if they paid it off by a certain time. So you got to do what we have on the screen now. Okay? So starting on page 320 and going to 321, 1 through 10.